Before dawn ever touched the fields of Rosewood, there was a sound that never stopped, the slow drag of chains against dirt. Not loud, not frantic, just steady, like a heartbeat made of iron. It was the rhythm of life on the plantation, the kind that told you when to wake, when to kneel, and when to bleed. Charity heard it every morning. And every morning, she wondered if the sound would ever end. She was 28, old enough to have seen too much, young enough to still dream that somewhere beyond the cane fields, life could mean something else. The air before sunrise was heavy and wet. The fog lay low, curling around the cabins like it wanted to hide the people inside. But there was no hiding at Rosewood. The overseer's whip could find anyone, anywhere. Charity wrapped a rag around her wrist where yesterday's lash had opened her skin. She didn't wince. Pain had become something familiar, like breath. The kind of thing you stopped noticing because it never really went away. When she stepped outside, the field was already moving, dozens of silhouettes bent under invisible weights. You could smell the cane, sweet and sharp, mixing with the smoke of the kitchen fires. Somewhere, a baby cried. Somewhere else, someone sang low, almost under their breath, not a song of joy, but of survival. From the porch of the big house, Master Silas Bogard stood watching. Cream-colored linen, cigar in hand, eyes cold and small. He liked to start his mornings like this, surveying his kingdom, pretending the sun rose just to shine on his fields. And beside him, like a shadow that could crack thunder, stood Ward, the overseer. His whip coiled at his side, waiting for an excuse. "Charity," he barked. The name hit the air like a lash. "Kitchen." "No." She didn't answer. Didn't look up. Just walked. Bare feet on packed earth. The walk of someone who had learned that silence was safer than truth. The kitchen was already hot, smoke curling from the stoves. The white cook, Simon, grumbled about the feast that night, the harvest banquet. The whole county was coming, he said. More mouths than meat. More wine than mercy. Charity said nothing. Her hands worked fast, chopping onions, stirring pots, fetching water, every motion practiced to the point of invisibility. But her eyes were alive. Counting the knives on the table, the jars on the shelf, the door hinges. Every small thing that could, in the right hands, become a weapon. Later, when the others gathered in the quarters, someone asked her what she was thinking. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared into the fire until it burned a reflection in her eyes. "What happens," she whispered, "if one day we stop bowing?" The room went still, because that kind of question was dangerous. Words like that could get you killed. But in that silence, in that moment where everyone held their breath, something shifted. 4 years, fear had been the master of Rosewood. But now, fear had a rival. That night, as the rain began to whisper outside, Charity lay awake on her thin mattress, listening to the storm build. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, slow, heavy, like footsteps coming closer. And in her chest, something answered. She didn't know it yet, but that sound, that storm, would one day be her signal. The first note in a symphony of revolt. The night was almost silent again, except for that steady, endless rhythm of chains. But for the first time, Charity didn't just hear them. She imagined them breaking. By the next morning, the fog had lifted, but the weight of Rosewood never did. The field stretched endlessly, green and gold beneath the sun, beautiful in the way only cruel things can be. From a distance, it looked peaceful. But up close, every stalk carried the sweat and blood of those who worked it. Charity moved through the rows with the others, blade flashing in rhythm. The air shimmered with heat and insects, and somewhere far off, Ward's whistle sliced through the stillness. He always whistled before he struck, a tune sharp enough to make your stomach twist before the whip even landed. 4 years, Charity had endured. She had watched mothers lose their children to auctions, husbands beaten until their bones cracked, women dragged from their beds in the dark. She had learned to swallow every scream, because at Rosewood, silence was the only armor anyone could afford. But lately, that silence had started to crumble. It began with Jonas, the blacksmith, broad-shouldered, scarred, and quiet. He'd been on the plantation longer than most. His hands were strong enough to shape iron, but gentle when they handed Charity a tin cup of water during breaks. There was something in his eyes, a kind of steady fire that didn't burn out no matter how much the overseer tried to stamp it down. One evening, after the day's labor, he came to her hut. He didn't speak at first. Just sat near the door, listening to the frogs croak outside and the low murmur of prayers drifting from the other cabins. Then he reached into his coat and set something on the dirt floor, a small metal file and a piece of rope. Charity stared at them. Tools. Simple. Silent. Dangerous. "Why?" she asked softly. Jonas looked up, his face lit only by the faint orange of the fire. "Because someday," he said, "we're gonna need more than prayers." He left without another word. That night, Charity couldn't sleep. She stared at the roof, listening to the rain tapping like restless fingers above her head. Every drop sounded like a question. When will you stop surviving and start fighting? By morning, the question had become an answer. She began to move differently, slower where she needed to hide, quicker where she needed to plan. When Ward shouted, she didn't flinch. When Silas leered from the porch, she looked past him, her mind already somewhere else, in the shadows of the kitchen, counting every bottle, every knife, every door that locked and every one that didn't. In the evenings, a small circle began to form. Not loud. Never all at once. A few faces at first. Ezekiel, the old field hand with scars older than Charity's lifetime. Mora, the woman who whispered strange words no one could quite translate, but somehow felt like armor when she spoke them. And Ruth, young, tired, with a baby barely old enough to crawl. They met under the guise of sharing food or tending to wounds, but everyone knew what it really was, the planting of something dangerous. "Freedom," Ezekiel said once, his voice low, rough as stone, "ain't a gift. It's something you take and pay for." Mora nodded, eyes half closed. "And sometimes," she whispered, "you pay in blood." The firelight flickered across their faces, turning them into shapes of shadow and resolve. Charity said little. But in her chest, that fire Jonas had handed her, quiet and small, began to grow. The next time she looked out over the fields, she didn't see Cain. She saw kindling. And somewhere deep in the earth of Rosewood. The nights at Rosewood had always been thick with silence, that heavy, haunted kind that wrapped around the cabins and pressed against your lungs. But lately, something had changed. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It listened. Every evening, after the last bell and the overseer's footsteps faded, Charity would sit by the dying fire. Jonas would slip in through the shadows, Ezekiel close behind, Mora murmuring those low, ancient words that felt older than the land itself. Their whispers filled the dark, threading through the smoke like the first strands of a plan. It began simple. Who could be trusted? Who couldn't? Which guards drank too much? Which doors stayed unlocked after sundown? But each night, the plan grew sharper, more alive. It was Mora who gave them the sign. 3 thunders, she said one night, her voice barely more than breath. The third will be the mark. When it rolls across the sky, you move. Charity turned the phrase over in her mind like a secret charm. 3 thunders. The code felt right, a storm to answer a storm. The plan was set to unfold on the night of the harvest banquet. The same night the masters and their guests would fill their bellies and toast to another year of prosperity. Charity knew that meant another year of chains. But not this time. In the kitchen, she worked with a calm that almost scared her. Each motion deliberate, each glance calculated. Simon, the white cook, complained as always, too lost in his own noise to notice how closely she studied the pantry shelves, how carefully she measured her steps. Jonas came in pretending to fix a door hinge. Beneath the noise of his hammer, his voice was a whisper. "Back gate has 2 locks," he said. "One's rusted clean through. Breaks quiet if you pry just right." "Who'll be there?" Charity asked. "Someone quick. Someone they don't notice." Her eyes flicked toward the boy sweeping the corner. "Ben," she said softly. "He moves like smoke." Jonas hesitated. "He's just a child." She met his gaze. "So were most of us when they took everything." That night, the circle met in the far end of the quarters, hidden in the dark where moonlight couldn't find them. The air was thick with damp wood and quiet fear. Ezekiel drew a rough map in the dirt, the fields, the sheds, the main road. His finger stopped on the cane shed. "Here's the weak lock. Break it, we get to the swamp. 2 routes, but one's too long for the old and the young. Then we take the short way, Charity said. No turning back. Mora reached into her dress and pulled out a small bundle, roots tied with a strip of red cloth. Boil this in his wine, she said. Just enough to slow his blood. He'll feel it coming, but not soon enough. Charity took the bundle, wrapping it in a scrap of linen. She didn't smile. She didn't pray. She only whispered, 3 thunders. The group repeated it softly, a promise, a warning, a prayer. For the next few days, the air itself felt charged. Every glance from a guard felt heavier. Every order from Ward seemed sharper. Charity could feel the clock ticking beneath the ordinary rhythm of life. The night before the feast, rain gathered somewhere far off, muttering in the distance. Thunder grumbled once, faint, low. Charity looked up at the sky through the cracks in her roof. 2 more to come. She closed her eyes, hand over her chest, and felt her heartbeat match the storm's pulse. When the 3rd thunder struck, she would not be afraid. She would be free. The morning of the banquet dawned heavy, thick with the promise of rain. The sky hung low, bruised gray, and the air carried that strange stillness that comes before a storm. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Rosewood Plantation was alive with motion. Servants rushed back and forth, polishing silver, hauling barrels, scrubbing floors that would soon be dirted again by boots that had never touched the earth in work. From the kitchen came the sounds of knives chopping, pots clattering, and Simon's endless barking orders. Charity stood in the middle of it all, calm, too calm. The others saw only another day of labor, but inside her chest, her heartbeat felt like a drum calling her toward something irreversible. By noon, the guests began arriving, carriages rolling up the drive, wheels grinding over gravel. Silks, brass buttons, perfume, the smell of wealth masking the rot of cruelty beneath it. From the small window by the pantry, Charity watched them laughing, fanning themselves, sipping sweet wine as if they owned the sky. Master Silas Bogard greeted each one with that same smirk, the one that had haunted her since she was 13. But as he shook hands and boasted about his harvest, Charity noticed something new behind his smile, a faint redness in his eyes, a weariness he didn't understand was already creeping through his bloodline, waiting for tonight. The banquet stretched long into the evening. Candles flickered, shadows danced on the walls, and thunder rolled in the distance, the first low warning. Inside the kitchen, Charity moved like a ghost. Her hands steady, her steps soundless. Simon sent her to fetch the master's private wine, the dark bottle kept apart from the others. As she lifted it, her hand brushed against the small pouch Mora had given her. The roots inside felt dry, lifeless, but she knew their power. In the pantry's silence, she worked quickly. Cork out. Powder in. A gentle swirl until the liquid rippled, swallowing the secret whole. She watched it still again, dark, smooth, unchanged. Death wearing the face of celebration. When she returned to the hall, laughter met her like a wave. The guests clinked glasses, boasting about cotton yields, politics, and wars they'd never fight. At the head of the table, Silas lifted his goblet. Charity stood near his shoulder, waiting. Thunder rumbled again, louder this time, rolling across the land like a warning no one heard. Silas drank. The 2nd thunder followed moments later, cracking through the night sky, rattling the chandeliers. Guests murmured nervously, glancing toward the windows. Just a storm, someone said. Nothing to fear. But Charity's heart was racing. One more. The 3rd thunder came not as a rumble but as a roar, deep, violent, splitting the heavens open. And with it, everything began to unravel. Outside, locks groaned and hinges broke. Jonas and Ben were moving. Inside, Silas's hand trembled around his cup. His face flushed deep, then pale. His breath hitched. A sound escaped him, half cough, half gasp. Every eye turned toward him. He stumbled to his feet, knocking over his chair. The red wine spilled across the white linen like blood. The room froze. Ward shouted, "Get him to his chambers!" But it was too late. Silas's knees gave out. He collapsed, clutching his chest, eyes wide, and for the first time, afraid. Charity stood still, the tray slipping from her hands, silver crashing to the floor. In that moment, thunder and screams merged into one sound, the sound of a world breaking. Outside, the storm hit full force. Rain lashed against the windows, and somewhere beyond the walls, the first cries of freedom rose through the darkness. The revolt had begun. And Charity, standing over her fallen master, whispered to herself, "It's time." The third thunder still trembled in the air when the first scream echoed through the hall. The guests surged to their feet, silk rustling, chairs scraping, panic spreading faster than the lightning outside. Silas Bogard lay motionless, eyes glassy, one hand twisted in the tablecloth as if he could hold on to life through linen. For a heartbeat, everyone froze. Then Ward's voice split the silence. "Lock the doors. Nobody leaves." But the world was already leaving him behind. From outside came the sharp crack of breaking wood, the cane shed gate giving way. Then a shout. Then another. And then, like thunder answering thunder, the sound of dozens of feet pounding across the wet earth. Freedom had found its voice. Charity turned toward the doorway just as the back door burst open. Jonas appeared, soaked from the rain, chest heaving, eyes wild with urgency. "It's open," he shouted. "Move." Ward spun, whip in hand, but before he could strike, Jonas swung the iron ladle he carried like a weapon. The blow landed hard, sending Ward sprawling into the table. Dishes shattered, wine splashed, candles toppled, and in seconds the banquet turned into chaos. Guests screamed. One woman fainted. Another stumbled into the fireplace as sparks leapt toward her gown. Smoke filled the room, the air thick and choking. Charity grabbed Ruth, who had slipped in behind Jonas, her baby strapped tight to her chest. "Get to the fields," she yelled over the storm. "Now." Ezekiel appeared at the kitchen door, his blade flashing in the candlelight. Behind him, Ben darted in and out of the shadows, a blur of movement, unlocking the livestock pens, throwing open the gates. The animals bolted into the rain, adding to the bedlam, hooves striking the mud, thunder rolling above. Charity's bare feet hit the porch. The rain was cold and relentless, washing the blood and dirt into the earth. She turned once, just long enough to see Silas's body slumped across the table, the tyrant of Rosewood finally silent. But Ward wasn't finished. He rose from the floor, face slick with blood, whip clutched in one hand like a serpent. "You think you can run?" he snarled. "I'll hang you myself." He lunged. Charity caught the glint of steel beside her, the carving knife from the sideboard. She didn't think. She moved. The blade met flesh, clean and sure, the motion almost calm. Ward stumbled backward, shock twisting across his face, then fell, the whip slipping from his grasp into the mud. Charity stood over him for a single breath. "Not any more," she said. Then she turned and ran. The night exploded with movement. Dozens of figures sprinted across the yard, women clutching children, men carrying bundles of food, old ones leaning on younger shoulders. The rain came harder, drenching everything, turning the ground into rivers of red and brown. Lightning lit the cane fields, and for a heartbeat, Charity saw them all, 40 souls cutting through the darkness, heading for the swamp. Behind them, the mansion still burned with candlelight and terror. Inside, the last of the guests barricaded themselves in rooms, whispering prayers that no one would hear. Ezekiel's voice carried over the storm, "Keep low! Stay together!" Jonas stayed at the rear, dragging barrels into the path to slow any who followed. Charity ran beside Ruth, guiding her through the mud, one arm shielding the baby from the rain. Somewhere behind them, a horn sounded, the overseer's men rallying what was left of their courage. But the enslaved were already gone, swallowed by the fields and the night. Charity didn't look back. Not once. She had already buried her past in that house, and now she was running towards something no one at Rosewood had ever tasted. Freedom, wet, wild, and waiting beyond the storm. The rain came down in sheets, blurring the world into streaks of gray and silver. The cane fields, once a place of torment, now became a labyrinth of freedom, wild, alive, and trembling under the weight of the storm. Charity led the way, her bare feet sinking into the mud. The water was already ankle-deep, turning every step into a struggle. Behind her, Ruth clutched her baby close beneath a torn blanket. Ezekiel followed, steady despite his age, one hand gripping a rusted blade. Jonas took the rear, checking over his shoulder every few seconds, his eyes scanning for lanterns, for the hunt that he knew was coming. "Faster!" Charity called. "The swamp's close." Lightning split the sky, and for a heartbeat, the entire field lit up, the endless rows of cane, the dark tree line ahead, the smoke from the house curling into the clouds. Somewhere behind them came the sound of shouting. Then, a single gunshot. Ben flinched. "They're coming! Keep moving!" Jonas barked, his voice cutting through the thunder. The sound of hooves followed, distant at first, then closer, pounding against the soaked earth. The hunters were riding hard, their hounds baying through the rain. Charity veered left, toward the marshland. "This way." The ground grew softer, the air heavier. The smell changed, the sweet cane giving way to the thick, wet scent of moss and decay. The swamp loomed ahead, a dark curtain of cypress trees draped in Spanish moss, their roots twisting like claws out of the mud. As they reached the edge, Ezekiel stopped and turned back. Through the storm, the lights were closer now, orange glows bobbing in the dark, voices shouting orders. "Go," he said. "I'll cover the rear." But Charity shook her head. "No one gets left behind." She grabbed a branch from the ground, dipped it into the muck, and smeared the mud up her arms and across her face. The others watched in confusion until she said, "The dogs. They can't smell what they can't find. Do it, all of you." One by one, they followed, covering themselves, even the children, in black swamp mud until their scent blended with the earth. Ben looked up at her, eyes wide. "Will it really work?" Charity nodded. "It has to." They waded in. The water was cold, rising past their knees, then to their waists. It clung to their skin like ice and pulled at their legs with every step. The swamp swallowed sound differently than the fields. The rain softened into a whisper, the thunder dulled into a low growl. Only the breath of the fugitives broke the silence now, the soft gasps of effort, the quiet sobs of children trying not to cry. "Stay close," Jonas murmured. "Hold on to the roots if you slip." Lightning flashed again, and in that brief flare, Charity saw what they were up against. Twisted branches reaching out like arms, pools of black water where the ground vanished, and eyes, bright, low, watching from beneath the surface. Still, she kept going. Each step forward was a defiance, a small victory against the past that had tried to chain her forever. Behind them, a horn sounded again, closer now. The hounds barked, their voices breaking through the storm. Charity stopped, turned toward the sound, and whispered a promise into the wind. "You won't find us." Then she pressed forward, leading her people deeper into the swamp, where the land itself seemed to bend and breathe with them. The storm howled above, the earth shuddered beneath, and the night swallowed them whole. Freedom wasn't safe. Freedom wasn't easy. But for the first time, it was real. The swamp at night was a world without mercy. The rain had slowed to a mist, but the air was thick, hot, wet, and heavy with the smell of rot and fear. Each breath came shallow. Each step sank deeper into mud that wanted to keep whatever it touched. Charity crouched low between the roots of a cypress, one arm around Ruth and her baby, the other gripping a sharpened stick. The darkness was complete, the kind that felt alive, pressing close, whispering secrets you didn't want to hear. From somewhere far behind came the faint sound of dogs. Not close, but not far enough. The hounds barked, then went quiet, then barked again, a cruel rhythm that reminded everyone they were still being hunted. Jonas crawled up beside her, his breath ragged. "They've split up," he said. "Two groups. Ward and Pike took half the men up the ridge. The rest are combing the marsh. How long before they reach us?" He glanced toward the flicker of lanterns weaving through the fog. "Soon." Charity nodded, her jaw tightening. "Then we don't wait for them." She motioned for Ezekiel and Ben. Together, they began guiding the others deeper into the swamp. The children were lifted onto backs, the elders supported by arms and sticks. The water rose past their knees, then their waists, turning each step into a battle. The swamp spoke in strange ways, frogs croaking, insects droning, branches creaking like old bones. Somewhere nearby, something large moved under the surface, slow and unseen. Mora murmured a prayer under her breath, her voice steady despite the fear that clung to everyone. Her words were old, rhythmic, the language of ancestors carried across oceans and generations. It gave the group strength, a small flicker of light in the endless dark. Suddenly, a splash tore through the stillness. Everyone froze. A shape moved in the black water ahead, long, low, and gliding. An alligator, sliding between them and the narrow path of roots that led to higher ground. "Don't move," Charity whispered. The creature drifted closer, its eyes glinting faintly in the moonlight. Time stretched thin, seconds like hours. Then, from behind them, a distant gunshot cracked through the swamp. The sound startled the beast. It turned, sliding back into the murk, vanishing as silently as it came. "Go!" Charity hissed. They hurried forward, climbing over slick roots and half-sunken logs until the ground rose slightly under their feet. For a moment, it almost felt safe. But safety didn't last long in Rosewood's shadow. Lantern light flickered again, closer this time, bobbing between the trees. Voices followed, rough and angry. "I know you're out there," Ward's voice bellowed, thick with rage. "Ain't nowhere left to run." Jonas's hand tightened around his makeshift weapon. "He's closer than I thought." Ezekiel pointed toward a narrow ridge to the east. "Old path there, leads to dry land if we make it before dawn." Charity nodded. "Ben, take Ruth and the children first. Jonas, you and Ezekiel guard the rear." "What about you?" Jonas asked. She looked back toward the voices. "Someone has to make sure they follow the wrong trail." Before he could protest, she scooped a handful of wet leaves, soaked them in swamp water, and smeared them against a fallen branch. Then she dragged it through the mud, carving a false trail westward. "Go," she whispered. "I'll find you." Jonas hesitated, then nodded, trusting her the way a spark trusts fire. As the others vanished into the fog, Charity crouched low among the reeds. The lantern light grew brighter, the voices nearer. She could see them now, the outlines of riders, hounds sniffing, Ward's whip coiled and ready. She waited until they passed, then slipped silently into the water behind them, her reflection vanishing beneath the ripples. The swamp swallowed her whole, a ghost among ghosts. And for the first time, the hunters were the ones being hunted. By dawn, the storm had broken into a low mist, and the swamp glistened in shades of gray and gold. The fugitives moved slowly now, worn, hungry, and caked in mud. But they were still moving, and that meant they were still alive. Ezekiel led the way, his bare feet finding the firmest ground by instinct. "Keep close," he whispered. "This ridge'll carry us through." Charity trailed behind him, scanning the trees. The swamp was quieter now, but quiet could be dangerous. It meant the hounds had lost the scent, or that the hunters had grown smarter. Ruth stumbled, nearly falling, her baby whimpering against her chest. Charity caught her, steadying her by the arm. "Just a little farther," she murmured. "We stop when we find cover." Ben darted ahead like a shadow, light on his feet despite exhaustion. When he returned, his eyes were wide. "Smoke," he whispered. "Up ahead. But not fire. It smells cooked." Jonas tensed. "Could be them." "Or not," Charity said. Her voice was steady, but her heart hammered. "If it's a camp, it means people. And people mean choices. Let's see which kind." They crept forward through the palmettos, every rustle sounding too loud in the still air. The scent of smoke grew stronger, wood, not gunpowder. Then came voices. "Lo, come." Familiar in rhythm, but foreign in tone. Ezekiel raised a hand, signaling the group to stop. He stepped into the clearing alone, his hands open, his voice soft. "We come in peace. 40 souls from Rosewood. We mean no harm." From the shadows, a bowstring drew tight. "Name yourself," a man's voice called. It was deep, wary, used to command. "Ezekiel," the old man said. "We're running from the ones who think they own us." The archer stepped into view, tall, lean, his clothes made from woven reeds and rough cloth. Beside him stood a woman wrapped in bright fabric, her gaze sharp as the edge of a blade. "You lead them?" she asked, her eyes landing on Charity. "I do," Charity answered, stepping forward. "We're not here to take. We're here to live. To work. To fight if we have to." A long silence followed. The woman studied her, then glanced toward the exhausted faces behind her, the children, the elders, the wounded. Finally, she nodded. Come. The group followed through a narrow path that wound between trees until the land opened up into a hidden clearing. The maroon haven lay before them, a secret world built by those who had escaped long before. Small huts of cypress wood and palmetto leaves stood in circles. Smoke rose in thin, careful streams from cooking fires. The air smelled of fish, herbs, and smoke, the scent of a life reclaimed. Children peeked from doorways, eyes wide with wonder. Men and women worked quietly, weaving nets, mending baskets, sharpening spears. It was a village carved out of defiance, invisible to the outside world, alive with the hum of survival. The woman led Charity to a circle of stones where 4 elders sat. One, with a walking stick carved from bone, spoke first. "You bring mouths to feed," he said, "and eyes that will draw danger here." Charity bowed her head. "We bring hands to work, eyes to keep watch, and hearts that will defend this place as our own." The elders exchanged quiet words. Finally, the old man nodded. "You may stay. But if danger follows, you take it with you." "We understand," Charity said. That night, the fugitives slept for the first time in freedom's shadow. No chains. No whips. Just the sound of frogs in the marsh and the low crackle of fire. Jonas sat beside Charity, staring into the flames. "Think they'll come?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "They always come." But in her voice, there was no fear. Only resolve. Because now, they were not just survivors. They were a people with a place to stand. Night fell over the maroon haven like a warning. The fires burned low, their smoke curling straight into the air, a sign of calm on the surface, but beneath that calm, every heartbeat in the camp beat with fear and defiance. Charity stood near the edge of the clearing, staring out toward the dark ridge where the swamp gave way to the forest. Somewhere out there, she could feel them, the men who refused to let go of their power, even as the world began to crumble around them. Jonas approached quietly. "You haven't closed your eyes once," he said. "Sleep can wait," Charity murmured. "They can't." He didn't argue. Instead, he handed her a crude spear he'd fashioned from a broken musket barrel. "Then you should have this." Before she could answer, 2 young scouts burst into the clearing, panting, mud streaking their faces. One held a man by the wrists, tied, bloodied, and glaring. "Found him watching from the ridge," one scout said. "He's no hunter. Just a mouthpiece." The prisoner spat blood into the dirt. "They're coming," he hissed. "Ward, Pike, the militia. They know the name Charity. They'll burn this whole place down." A hush fell over the camp. Even the fires seemed to pause. Ezekiel stepped forward, his old voice steady. "Then let them come. We've got more to lose than they can steal." Charity looked around, at Ruth holding her baby near the huts, at Mora whispering over herbs by the fire, at Ben standing tall beside Ezekiel with a knife too big for his hand. These weren't soldiers. They were families. But tonight, that would have to be enough. She turned to the crowd, her voice carrying through the still air. "If they find this place," she said, "they won't just take us, they'll take everyone who ever called this haven home. So tonight, we stand. Not for revenge. For the right to stay breathing." The elders nodded. The warriors began to prepare. Jonas and Ezekiel set stakes into the ground near the path. Ben and 2 older boys spread mud along the open trail to make it slick. Mora sprinkled herbs into the fires, whispering words that twisted the smoke into thin, strange shapes. Then, from somewhere beyond the trees, the first sound came, a dog's bark, low and sharp. Another followed. Then another. "They're here," Jonas said. Ward's voice broke the silence. "Charity," he bellowed from the shadows. "Come out now, and maybe I'll let the rest live." No one moved. Then Pike's voice joined, colder. "Burn it down." Lanterns flared along the ridge. The dogs surged forward, and in an instant, the swamp exploded with sound. The first hound hit one of Ben's snares and yelped, thrashing. The second charged straight into a sharpened stake. Chaos erupted. The militia charged, rifles raised, shouting through the dark. Jonas met Ward head-on. Iron met whip, sparks flying as the two men collided. Ward's strike caught Jonas across the shoulder, but he didn't fall. He swung back with all his strength, the sound like metal striking bone. Ezekiel and Ben fought side by side, driving back two men with sticks and sheer fury. Mora's herbs turned the air thick, smoke curling through the trees and confusing the hounds. Charity moved through the firelight like a shadow. She found Pike near the edge of the camp, rifle raised. He fired, missing her by inches. She lunged, the spear in her hands moving faster than thought, faster than fear. The point drove deep, and Pike fell, eyes wide, the rifle clattering to the mud. Across the clearing, Ward staggered, blood running from his jaw. He looked at Charity, rage and disbelief burning through the pain. "You think you've won?" he spat. Charity stepped closer, her face lit by the flicker of fire. "No," she said. "We just stopped losing." The words hung in the smoke. Then Ward turned and fled into the trees. When the last echoes faded, the swamp was quiet again, except for the crackle of the fires and the ragged sound of breathing. They had held. The cost was written in blood, but the haven still stood. Jonas sank to the ground beside her, exhausted. "You think they'll be back?" Charity looked toward the horizon, where the first pale light of dawn began to show. "Maybe," she said. "But if they do, they'll find nothing left to own." The swamp exhaled, tired, wounded, but alive. And for the first time since Rosewood burned, freedom felt real enough to touch. Morning broke over the swamp in thin streaks of gold. The air was quiet again, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm, heavy with what's been lost and what's been won. The maroon haven still stood, though smoke rose from its edges where the battle had burned the ground. The defenders moved slowly through the clearing, tending to the wounded, burying the fallen. Ruth sat near the fire, her baby asleep against her chest. Ben slept beside Ezekiel's feet, his knife still clutched in one small hand. Charity stood apart, watching the sunlight catch the trees. The war outside, the one tearing across the South, was changing everything. Word had reached them in fragments. Union troops pushing deeper into South Carolina, slaveholders fleeing north, the Confederacy fraying at the edges. Freedom, it seemed, was coming like a rising tide. But Charity had learned never to trust freedom promised by someone else's hands. She needed to see it, to prove it. By nightfall, she gathered Jonas, Ezekiel, Ruth, and Ben. "We're going back," she said simply. Ezekiel frowned. "Back to Rosewood," Charity said. "There's one last chain still hanging there. We break it for good." No one argued. They all knew what she meant. At dawn, they set out. The path through the swamp was one they had taken before, but this time they walked it as free people. The mud still pulled at their feet, the trees still whispered, but fear no longer followed them. By midday, the fields of Rosewood came into view through the mist. The mansion loomed beyond, once bright and cruel, now gray and hollow. No guards, no overseers, just silence. The house was empty, but not dead. Inside, dust covered everything. The silver, the furniture, even the grand portrait of Silas Bogard that still hung crooked on the wall. The smell of candle wax lingered, faint but stubborn, as if the memory of the feast refused to leave. Jonas found the kitchen first. The same pots, the same knives, the same hearth where the revolt had begun. "Feels smaller than I remember," he said quietly. Charity stepped to the window, looking out over the cane fields, the endless rows that had stolen lifetimes. "Small things always look big when they sit on your back," she murmured. Ezekiel carried dry straw from the shed. Ruth gathered broken chairs and bits of wood. Jonas found a lantern still half full of oil. When they were done, they stood in the yard, facing the house that had once owned them. Charity struck the first spark. The flame caught slow at first, a flicker against the straw, then faster, hungrier, until the porch glowed orange. No one spoke. They only watched as the fire spread, crawling up the walls, swallowing curtains, beams, portraits. The roof cracked, the windows shattered, and sparks rose into the morning sky like spirits finally breaking free. "The blood here won't feed Cain again," Charity said softly. The others stood behind her, the reflection of the fire dancing in their eyes. It wasn't vengeance anymore. It was cleansing. The end of something old, and the beginning of something that had no name yet. By nightfall, Rosewood Plantation was nothing but a smoking skeleton. The fields glowed faintly in the distance, a scar across the land. When they returned to the Maroon Haven, no one asked what they'd done. They didn't have to. The glow on the horizon told a story for them, a signal, a warning, and a promise. Weeks later, the Union Army reached the swamps. The war was ending. Freedom was no longer a rumor, it was law. But for the people of Rosewood, freedom had come long before that. And long after the soldiers marched away, the story lived on. Passed from voice to voice, firelight to firelight, about the woman who walked 40 souls out of bondage, who fought the storm, who burned the house that had once claimed to own her. Her name was Charity. And when the whip sang again, it didn't sing on her back. It sang for her victory.